From Athens to London, Debate House crossed 2,400 kilometers. We made this journey to bring you our first ever international debate.
Before we begin, I would really like to say a big thank you to Stelios Philanthropic Foundation for their support, for their funding, because we couldn't have done that without them. And it is important, when such incredible organizations support small, big, doesn't matter, initiatives that they're aiming to create a better world. So thank you very much. We're also very grateful for our collaboration with the Hellenic Observatory and the LSE. Dr. Monastiriotis, it's our honor to be here and to be our keynote. Thank you very much. And of course, dear my friend Theodoris, I really respect, the way that you're thinking, the way that you love democracy, the way that we have collaborated for this incredible event. I think you are such a special person, okay? And I'm very proud to be your friend as well. And of course, our new partner, which is Mike, dear Mike, such a fantastic guy. Fantastic, Mike, he's very good salesman, I can tell you that. I mean, from the guys from Debate London, you already know that, but we didn't, and we're very proud, okay, and very shocked. Yeah, but again, Mike and Debate London, all of your team, we're very grateful, and I promise you that today is just the beginning of a wonderful collaboration. Our home in Greece, okay, we're waiting you also to host a nice event there. We promise you we're gonna bring more people because in Greece they know us more. Yeah, such a fantastic initiative that you have. Now I would like also to express, in Greece, in our Greek debates, sometimes accidentally, okay, when there's a nice moment during a debate, I say very loudly, here, okay? But, okay, now here in the UK, it's very common and you know why. But in Greece, they look at me in a very, strange way. Yeah, and why is saying that? I mean, because in Greece, we just clap or we say, bravo and all that. And I just wanted to say for our Greek audience in the cameras that here actually established in the 18th century in the British Parliament. Why? Because they didn't have microphones, and there was a lot of MPs, and because they wanted to hear someone, they would say, hear him, hear me. So pay attention to what he's saying or what she's saying. And why? And through the ages, this transformed that I agree with that statement. So from hear him, it comes out to hear. So I agree with this statement. Just for our Greek audience and for me, now you're not feeling very weird and I'm not also feeling very awkward for saying these things. So, and at the end, there's also a great significance in today's debate. Not only for the motion, which is about Brexit, which is in the heart of the UK soul right now, as a problem, as a complex, solution or not. What is interesting in today's debate is that Greeks found democracy. I mean, okay, we found it right now, we're not really respecting it in any way, but we're trying our best through Debate House and other initiatives. But we are the founders, and UK is the oldest serving democracy, okay? And I think this is a strong message of these two great civilizations combining together, serving a high-level debate for our audience and for our democracies. And I'm very grateful and proud for our collaboration. So these are my words, and thank you very much. And let's have a great debate. Here, indeed.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends from Greece that we're really happy to see you here. It is a privilege to be here in the heart of London before all of you, and you're about to experience something really powerful, a different kind of debate, a debate without a fight, a debate without shouting much, just dialogue, and a dialogue that has the power to shape how we see ourselves, how we see each other, and how we see the future that we want to share. A debate house, actually, we believe that public dialogue is not just an exercise of words. It's the foundation of democracy, and it's the way we learn to listen before we speak, to respect before we disagree, and to build bridges instead of walls. Debate is not about winning an argument. It is about discovering truth together, even when we come from different backgrounds, different worlds, and different beliefs. But the principles we stand for are simple, but at the same time, they're profound. First of all, respect, because without respect, dialogue collapses. Second, courage, because it takes courage to stand up and speak, but it also takes courage to sit down and listen. Third, inclusion, because every voice matters, especially those who have been ignored for too long. And third, responsibility, because responsibility, it's not just words, it's sounds, and they shape actions, they shape lives, and they shape nations. And let me close with a thought inspired by the wisdom of ancient Greeks. Aristotle once said, human is by nature political animal. Let's paraphrase that tonight and say that we are citizens not by birth, but by choice. And every choice we make in dialogue is a step toward a better democracy. Thank you.
Okay, so our first speaker, Miss Catherine McBride, for 5 minutes. Here.
Hi. You may be wondering why someone with an Australian accent is here to defend Brexit, but I've lived in the UK for 38 years, and I was trading the financial markets when the Maastricht Treaty happened, and I was trading EU financial markets, which I was mainly selling derivatives to US hedge funds. So I was very conscious of how the European economies didn't actually work very well together, but they work together a lot better than the UK. And I must say, I'm sorry, two economists are following each other, and I'm going to say almost the same things you've said. The UK, when they turned the EEC into the EU, which was the Maastricht Treaty, which sort of happened in the early 90s, it was more and more obvious the UK did not fit in. We had to drop out of the ERM. We never wanted to adopt the euro. We had a rebate. We lost more votes than anyone else in the EU Parliament. We were just in the awkward squad. And that had a lot to do with the fact that we had a common law tradition. The EU has a civil law tradition. We have a first past the post government. The EU mainly was coalition governments because you had proportional representatives in most of the countries. We were very much free markets. We had an Anglosphere. The UK was one of the few countries in Europe that traded more outside the EU than inside the EU. There are some Central European countries that are 75% of their trade is with the other EU countries. So I think that not only was it good for the UK to leave, I think it was good for the EU that we left, because the EU has always been about technically being an ever closer union. And you can go back to the 50s when they first thought about it. But the person who was stopping that happen was the UK, because they joined with the idea that it was a trading organisation in the same way that they'd done the Commonwealth and the imperial preference. But it never really was. Jean Moreau and the first people that put the EU together always envisaged a sort of United States of Europe. And they had to get rid of the UK to achieve that. And they finally did with Brexit. And it always intrigued me that the EU tried to stop the UK leaving, because quite frankly, they should have said, not only to the EU, they should have said, you should go and you should take Sweden and Denmark, and anyone else that doesn't want to join the euro has to leave.
Can I ask a question at this moment? No, my question was the following. If it was so obvious to continental European countries that they wanted a closer union and Britain would stop that, why did they let Britain and indeed the Scandinavian countries in 1973? What was the gain to them at that point?
Well, yes, they did reject. They tried very hard to keep Britain out. The Scandinavian countries didn't actually join till the mid-80s, or actually mid-90s, sorry. The Scandinavians came in the mid-90s. Greece came in 84. But the UK, they did try and keep it out because the French recognised that the UK was never going to join properly and never going to follow the procedure. And I do think that when people will talk about how our trade has disappeared, it hasn't. We are trading as much with the EU now as we ever did. If our trade is going down at all, it's because we're no longer manufacturing the goods that we used to sell. Is that a a time up or something? So that, you know, we are much more connected to the Anglosphere. You did suggest in the earlier speech that, you know, if you're not with the EU, who are you with? Well, I think the UK always was more with the Anglosphere, and in fact, Margaret Thatcher did consider the UK joining NAFTA when she was the Prime Minister, because even she could see that, and still our biggest single trading partner is the US, and that's for both goods and services and both imports and exports. And now our second biggest trading partner has become China. So that it's very hard to see how we could keep going with the EU. In fact, since the UK left, we now have Ireland's biggest trading partner, trades more with non-EU countries because it trades with the US and the UK. And Denmark is also in that boat. So we can see that the UK was always kind of 1 foot out of the door. And I think that it's been good for the EU that we left. And it's because now, if you look at what's happening with the directives and the regulations, Mario Draghi wrote a very good paper last year complaining about the number of regulations, and the EU has acted on this. By now, there are no more directives. This year, there's been over 2,000 EU regulations, but a regulation comes directly from Brussels and all countries must implement it immediately, where the directives had to be implemented by each country's governments. So each country kind of, you know, made them a bit different, which meant that there was not a unified law. Since this year, since the Draghi report, that has stopped. And I think this is the first step that the EU is making towards ever closer union. Because once you had the euro, you had to have a common fiscal policy. You cannot continue to have a currency that does not have a common fiscal policy. The whole Tier 2 system doesn't make any sense. I'll be very interested to hear your comments on that.
Thank you.
You've got all of these economists, but is that my time up? Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Oh, thank you very much. I will give the floor to the second speaker. Here.
Thank you. I'd like to start by saying what an honor it is actually to have been invited to speak today at the Stelios Foundation, to speak at Debate House, and indeed with representatives from Debate London. I find it a little overwhelming, really. Debating is not something I've ever done. Sadly, I didn't have a classical education where I was taught rhetoric and the other things that you're supposed to learn. Thankfully, my son is. He is at King's College, currently reading classics, and I'm very glad to have someone from King's College on my team. I figure that might help us do somewhat better than I would. As Professor Monastiriotis said, we economists are very simple people. In a sense, Brexit is very simple. Do we really need to debate this? Clearly, it's a bad thing. And economists never agree. This is really interesting. Economists never agree. You have 100 economists in a room, and you'll have 102 opinions. Except on this. The Royal Economic Society took a straw poll of everybody attending their conference. So this is the Learned Society of Economists in the UK. They took a straw poll. Everybody at their conference, 99 out of 100 all said that Brexit was a bad thing. Why did they say it was a bad thing? Well, because Brexit makes it harder and more expensive to trade. And if it's harder and more expensive to trade, you will become worse off. I'll go into some of the details in my main sort of second speech, if you like, in a minute. But trade is good. Trade makes you better off. You stop trading, you make trading harder, it's going to make you worse off. And it's particularly going to make you worse off if you stop doing it with your nearest and indeed largest trading partner. Yes, we do trade more with the US and China than any individual EU country, but we still trade much more with the EU as a whole than we do either America and particularly China, actually.
A question. If Ireland trades more with the UK than it does with the rest of the EU, should Ireland then leave the EU and enter a free trade zone with the UK? Or are there maybe factors besides economics and trade at play?
Well, I can't speak for Ireland. And indeed, actually, I've got to be quite careful because I sit on the Irish Fiscal Council. So anything I say about Ireland could be misconstrued. But I will say one thing, actually, which is I was going to say anyway, so you may as well kick the clock off again. I was in an event a couple of weeks ago, and we were celebrating the 40th anniversary of the Anglo-Irish Agreement that was made in the mid-1980s. And Brexit was one of the top things that was being discussed at this thing. Why was it being discussed? Because Brexit has kicked the Northern Ireland peace process back. Thankfully, not too far. There are still no guns in Northern Ireland, which was not my words, that was the words of one of the speakers. But it is very clear that there is more tension in Northern Ireland now than there was before Brexit. Brexit has been a really bad thing, and it's been really felt in Northern Ireland. And of course, in the Republic of Ireland as well, because Northern Ireland matters to them. This is an aside, but again, something that was coming out of this conversation was the biggest problem with Northern Ireland is that it matters to the Republic of Ireland, never really seems to matter to the rest of the UK. There's always something bigger in the rest of the UK, and Brexit, of course, was a classic example of that. But it's not just the Republic of Ireland that we upset with Brexit. We upset all of our European friends and allies. The Scandinavian countries and Germany, we mentioned, see the world much more through the sort of free market, liberal economy way that we kind of see the world. They lost their biggest ally in terms of in EU debates. They were very upset. The French, I don't know. They were probably pleased. I suspect you're right on that one. But the thing is, we have lost a group of friendly countries at just the time when actually we really need to work more with them. The war on the continent of Europe is something that has made it even more important for us to work with our European colleagues. And at just the time when we should be doing that, we came out of the European Union. It's very sad.
May I ask a question?
Of course.
Is it not the case that we can still work with them without being in the EU? I mean, Keir Starmer seems to have revived the idea of an E3, seems to get on quite well with both the leaders of Germany and France, working on the coalition of the willing. I don't see why, especially on the important issues of like defence and security, we need to be in the EU for this.
Well, we don't, but I think it would all have been a lot easier had we remained in the EU. So anyway, I've only got 10 seconds left, so I'm going to close my opening statement by just saying again, we've cut ourselves off from trade with our nearest, largest trading partner. We've made it more expensive. That has made us worse off. And what have we got in return? Well, I'm sure the other side of the house will let me know the answer to that question. Thank you.
So now let's proceed to the second speaker of Brexit side. Hear, hear.
Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Reem. I am from the Institute of Economic Affairs over in London. First of all, just wanted to say thank you very much for inviting me. I absolutely think that freedom of expression, but also healthy debate is really important. I like the adage, I think it was from Oscar Wilde, I will defend to the death your right to make an arse of yourself. I think that's the best way to put it. When it comes to trade, I think we focus predominantly on economics here, and I think that that's definitely right. It is, as Catherine said earlier, it is untrue to say that we have ceased trading with the European Union. That's not true at all. But of course, the United States is the UK's largest trading partner. Now, I think that Brexit is fundamentally about freedom. It is about sovereignty. It is about opportunity. It is about the idea that we are able to make our own laws in our country, but also ensure that we have more trade. We're absolutely correct to say that trade makes us richer. If you want to become a richer country, get other countries that make things more cheaply to sell you cheap stuff. That's how you get richer. Free trade is extraordinarily important. And the European Union is nothing but a protectionist bloc. They implement tariffs and quotas and restrictions and regulations that make Europeans poorer every single day. And part of the problem is that whilst we were in the European Union, we were subject to all of these regulations, all of these tariffs and these quotas. And then when we left the EU, we just kept them. We might as well have stayed in if that's the case. We haven't removed a lot of these questions. So fundamentally, one particular example, it's a bit of a low-hanging fruit. I'm actually originally half Moroccan. And we still impose...
Sorry, can I
of course
ask a
you may,
question?
yes.
Since we're doing this, why do you think they kept them? Were they? I mean, it was the party who went for Brexit, applied Brexit, and then they kept the regulations. There must be a reason which says that they weren't to be removed. It's so difficult, so costly to remove them that you'd better keep them even after you exit.
Yeah, well, I think it's bad politics. I mean, we currently have the highest tax burden in British history is coming into this parliament. We are currently facing huge amounts of regulations and red tape. The Employment Rights Bill, so many different aspects of that are regulations that we are copying from the European Union. So we didn't have, when it came to Brexit, we didn't repeal a lot of that stuff. One example is Moroccan tomatoes. So we currently import Moroccan tomatoes, and in the UK, we impose tariffs and quotas on Moroccan tomatoes. But there is no protectionist case for imposing tariffs and quotas on Moroccan tomatoes because we have a completely different tomato growing season than Morocco. It's much warmer over there. They have a much longer tomato growing season. We are not protecting British farmers by imposing tariffs and quotas on Moroccan tomatoes. But we do, because when we were in the European Union, we imposed them to protect Italian and Spanish growers. When we left the EU, we just didn't bother repealing them. So part of the problem is that we have so many levers now that we've left the EU. We have so many opportunities to now ensure that we have that freedom. We can have better free trade, but we don't, because we have bad governments in Westminster. And that's really the crucial point here. Brexit gives us this opportunity. If we abolished all tariffs and quotas tomorrow, we would be a richer country. But we don't. We don't have the political willpower. We, again, as I said, are currently suffering under the highest tax burden in British history. It is about to get even higher with this government. We are currently suffering under some of the most stringent regulations and red tape. And part of the problem is fundamentally we don't have the willpower domestically to do that. The question is, can we be a freer country in the EU, or can we be a freer country outside of the EU? And I believe that we have all of the opportunities to make those changes outside of the EU. Yes.
Yes, I mean, this is a philosophical question for the organisers of the debate, really. Are we debating whether Brexit, as has been implemented, has harmed the UK, or are we debating Brexit plus all the things my colleague has just said? Would that have necessarily harmed the UK? There's a distinction there.
Well, I suppose what type of Brexit any of us want is probably a different question. In the minute and a half that I have, I've got a list of 10 things we should abolish now that we've left the EU. The Genetically Modified Organisms Directive. This is in 2018, the European Court of Justice ruled that altering living things using relatively new techniques of genome editing is banned. We should repeal that. It's bad for innovation. Number 2, the Clinical Trials Directive. These are regulations that have undermined cancer clinical trials, and we should repeal them too. The Health and Safety at Work Framework Directive. Again, further regulations and restrictions on workplaces, which fundamentally just add red tape and do not actually improve health and safety very much. Protection of animals during transport-related operations regulations. This is a requirement that allows exports of live animals, which the government has indicated it will then dispense with. Abolish VAT for the renovation of buildings and regulatory barriers to new homes. Again, ensuring that we're actually able to build more homes, increase supply, ensuring that we can have those prices come down because, my God, housing is unaffordable in this country. VAT on luxuries, get rid. Some of the vaping regulations, awful. We know that vaping is more than 95% less harmful than smoking. Why are we making it harder for adults to literally do things that are better for their health? Chemicals directive. Terrible. In 2006, the EU agreed a new regulation, and it has required and continues to require a huge amount of unnecessary animal testing in order for us to be able to use chemicals. Working time directive. This is terrible. Why do we require businesses to ensure that people are able to work a certain number of hours and restrict it? Terrible. Abolish it. We need to have a much more flexible labour market. And last but not least, food labelling. Abolish it too. We have so many opportunities now that we've left the European Union. Let's take back control and pull those levers. Thank you.
Such a dynamic speaker. So now let us proceed with the second speaker of the side of the pro-EU. Hear, hear.
Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Let me start off with my usual disclaimer as a civil servant. My views that I express are, of course, not necessarily representative of His Majesty's government, and in fact, they're not even representative of my own views, because I've been assigned this position, which is very much in keeping with the tradition of this fine organisation. And I think that's really important to what we're doing here now, which is not just having a conversation, but having a debate. And let us remember for a second what the purpose of having debates is. We have them when we need to make decisions, and we are faced with difficult choices where there is no obvious easy option to take. And therefore, whatever we do is going to carry a cost that will need to be justified. There will be a downside, whatever we do. And there is no way to take a middle path sometimes. Sometimes we do face a binary choice. So, what would you prefer in those circumstances? 6 random people to present to you their personal positions, or people to do what we're doing here tonight, to actually advise you of your options that are shaping your decision, and to try and bring to your attention the questions that most urgently need to be answered in order to make the best decision possible with the information that you have to hand at the moment. So with that, let me walk you through some of the personal positions that we have typically on display in this argument, in this debate, that our speakers have already touched upon. If you're a Brexit supporter, as we've already heard, you're normally going to fall back on the sovereignty argument. Flexibility is really important. We now have the flexibility to act in our own national interest. If you're opposed to Brexit, then typically you're going to focus on the economic costs. Brexit has done economic damage to the UK. Why do we do that to ourselves? If you're a member of the great British public, well, as of June 2025, in most recent polls, 61% of you consider Brexit a failure. A mere 13% of you consider it a success at the moment. But yet, the very same members of the British public were also the ones who, if they voted leave, thought 4% was a decisive margin. And if they voted remain, thought that it was the government's job to override public opinion and act against the result of a democratic mandate. So, who's right? I don't know. Do you? The reality is, if you were hoping that I was going to answer that question for you tonight, then you're going to have to wait about 10 years or so before we get a decisive answer either way. So how do we go about making this decision, especially if we have hard choices faced ahead about how do we manage our relationship with the European Union? We can't just say, can you hang on for 10 years, we'll come back to you. We've got decisions to make. So how do we do that? Well, ultimately, the question you really want to be asking yourself is it worth it? Whatever the downsides are, even if we assume that both sides of this debate have a point, if we just assume they're both right about what they say, there is evidence to support both of what they say after all, and there is evidence also to cast a significant degree of skepticism on what they say.
Question.
Yes.
With a UK population that voted to leave the EU by that 4% margin, what feasible alternative to Brexit do you really think there was?
I know we never asked them. We never gave them viable alternatives to consider. That would have been a great idea. I wish you'd asked that question in 2016 rather than 9 years later. But nonetheless, good question. What I want to go into in my second speech, I come back to you, is not just to leave you hanging. After all, I have just told you I'm not going to answer the most important question you presumably came here to hear answered. So I don't want to leave you hanging high and dry. I want to try and walk you through how to actually navigate this question of, is it worth it? How do we go about deciding that? But my remaining minute, I want to give you an example of a country that did face that choice and did have to walk that path, which was New Zealand. In 1973, a country that did suffer significant economic damage as a result of a decision the UK made about its relationship with Europe. But in this case, it was a decision to go into what was then the European Economic Community, which caused such a severe economic shock in New Zealand, who at that point were reliant on the preferential access they had to the UK market, which was suddenly replaced overnight by the common external tariff. That is now commonly referred to, that period between 1973 and 1983, as the lost decade for New Zealand. Yet they came back, they recovered, they developed a very resilient economy now that arguably has probably helped manage the risk of being too reliant on the UK's economy. So was it worth it? You might have some people say, yes, it was. The thing is, they didn't get a choice in that. The UK imposed that on them. If you had asked them to make that choice in 1973, would they have gone into that? Who knows? But maybe they might be learned from the example of the UK, which is why I would come back to my second speech, because we did have to face that choice in 1973, because we have been here before.
Thank you very much. So now let's proceed with the third speaker, again from Debate London. Hear, hear.
Distinguished members of the House, those of us watching online, welcome. There's an old joke about a good, proper, longue durée Marxist historian who was asked whether or not he thought the French Revolution was a good thing. And he was asked this in the late 20th century. And he said, it's really too soon to tell. That was a little bit of the last speech that we heard. But also, I think there's a sense to that, of we have to bear in mind we are still quite close to when Brexit happened. We are still coming to the end of the transitional phase. And we have to bear in mind that we are still stuck in this perspective of this has just happened, and we haven't seen the longue durée, we haven't seen the long-term effects yet. So many of the economic harms, the trade harms that we saw from Brexit are transitional. They are temporary. They are the result of uncertainty in the market. Markets don't like uncertainty. Markets are easily scared. Markets are simple creatures. And when you have a big change, they get scared. They react. You see bad things happen. But then that improves with time. That's something I want to talk to you about later on. But all of these harms, you have to remember, we are just coming out of the process. Any big change spooks the market. Any uncertainty leads to trade harms. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way forever. That's mostly what I don't want to talk to you about tonight, though. I want to talk to you about democracy. I want to talk to you about how Brexit was the only democratic choice, because something that the other side of the House haven't really engaged with and are almost running away from is the question of what was the alternative. We heard from our keynote speaker at the beginning that this was a choice of what house are you going to live in. And they are trying to avoid telling us what house it is the UK should be living in the counterfactual. Despite the fact they are telling us that Brexit did more harm than it did good, we need to tell us what it is being compared to. How could the UK have not left the European Union when it did? Because the UK's leaving of the European Union was not a surprise to anyone who actually listened to the British people. Because the British people said again and again that this is what they were going to do. Because as when previously mentioned, the UK originally joined the precursor of the EU, they were told it was a trade bloc. They were told it was an economic group. And they were then shocked and horrified when they found out that it was about ever closer union. And this is why in 2009, the UK gave second place to UKIP in the EU elections in the UK, despite the fact that UKIP's only policy was leaving the EU. In 2014, in the EU elections in the UK, they put UKIP first. In 2015, the British people voted for a Conservative Party which had a Brexit referendum in its manifesto, and they gave the Conservatives a majority. And in 2019, the UK actually gave the eponymous Brexit Party, again, the win in the EU elections. And all of this is without mentioning that 4% margin in the Brexit referendum itself. There was a democratic mandate that was put there. There was a democratic will to leave.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
Does it follow your own argument, therefore, that their decision to give a landslide victory to a party whose position is that Brexit has been a failure and has damaged the UK's economy, therefore shows that the British people actually agree with this side of the House?
I think if you were to say that statement to Keir Starmer, he would run away from that statement as hard as he could. Anyone who disagrees with that, I encourage you to look at what he says about Brexit. Instead, Keir Starmer this year negotiated a new strategic partnership with the UK that has been removing difficulties around food checks and UK exports to the EU. Keir Starmer is trying to make Brexit work. That is what he's standing for, because he knows anything else goes against the democratic will of the people. I think I've answered the question there, so if we want to go for the timer. Because staying means ignoring that will of the people. It either means people not giving the Brexit vote they wanted or ignoring the vote when they gave it. On this side of the House, we say on principle we don't accept that. On principle, we have to go along with what the people want. Because if the people want to vote for something that is bad economics, they are the ones who have the right to do that. Because it is the people who pay the taxes of the country, not the economists. They pay some, but not most of it. It is the people who serve on the juries. It is the people who fight in the wars. It is the people who are the citizenry. And if they want to adopt things that economists think are bad ideas on spending, on taxes, on trade, economists don't get to turn around and tell them, you don't get to have that policy. Instead, what is legitimate is what the people choose for themselves. And the people are the only people, the voters are the only people who can say if Brexit was worth it or not. If the harms, if the economic costs of taking back control are worth it, that question can only be answered by the electorate. And the electorate have shown both numerous times before the referendum and after the referendum that they are giving their votes to people who say, at worst, that they are going to make Brexit work. They are not voting for the Lib Dems or anyone who wants to take it back. They are voting for saying, we respect the fact this was the referendum result. We want to make the best of it for the UK. We think to ignore that is unconscionable and would almost certainly lead to bad consequences for the UK's democracy itself. So I am very proud to stand on the side that says only the people get to decide if Brexit has done more harm than good, and the people have voted for Brexit.
So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm still pretty new to sort of formal debating, but I'll try my best. So I've got quite a lot to go through, but I'm just going to be hard-hitting and fast. So one thing has become increasingly clear. The United Kingdom has grown weaker and weaker. There are many things you can attribute this to, but a main crux has reared its ugly head. And one that we may not fully put at the forefront of our discussions at times. That crux is Brexit, something that has been a multiplier for disaster. It has taken global crises, whether conflict and COVID, and made them distinctively worse for Britain. If we do not act now, we will surely continue down a path of ever apparent weakening and decline. That thing that we can do is reintegration with the EU. By doing so, we already mitigate the issues we currently face. There's the economy. We'll be able to move away from Brexit costing us £90 billion a year, according to The Independent, something that would help the Chancellor and her statements about the financial black hole we are dealing with. Not only that, we'll be able to deal with the 6% increase to your food prices that has been caused by it, something so pressing during a cost of living crisis. And what about our public services? After Brexit was voted on, the University of Surrey identified that it had caused an extra 1,500 deaths a year, caused by us having to replace the staff who left due to it with those who were less experienced or skilled. What's been said shouldn't be treated as abstract statistics. For many people, this may hit in a personal manner and ultimately affects all of us. Just those extra deaths were family and friends who didn't need to and shouldn't have been considered as extra. Let us also not forget how this affects us in other ways too. The end of free movement didn't just damage the NHS as well, it robbed the young of opportunity. The most obvious example of this is the right to work and live across 27 nations now gone from us. An entire generation's world is now smaller than their parents. The irony is that we ended the freedom of movement because Brexit promised us to take control. Yet we lost skilled workers and it didn't do anything to help us stop with things like rising immigration. We actually had control in the EU, which may come as a surprise. Article 7 of the EU Citizens' Rights Directive stated that you could come here and get a job only if you had the sufficient resources to do so, as long as you were not being a burden on the social assistance system of the country. With regards to that, sovereignty was the main thing told to us, the main thing we'd get out of Brexit. But real sovereignty is not just the ability to say no, but the power to act. We currently follow other international rules and individual treaties, tribunals regardless. The difference is that when we were inside the EU, we at the very least had the opportunity to create the laws, write the laws, modify the laws. Outside, we are simply just rule takers. The UK is stronger when...
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
While we were in the EU, we tried to prevent the single currency. That failed. While we were in the EU, we tried to prevent Schengen. That also failed. What kind of influence did we really have on these, like, the major decisions the EU has made in, like, the last 40 years?
Well, I mean, ultimately, as one of the speakers talked about, democracy is an important thing. And ultimately, democracy, they voted on to do that for the EU. And even then, we had exceptions to that regardless. So we did have some say in what happened to us at the very least. And just to continue, I'd say that the UK is stronger when it sits at the table shaping the situation, not hoping to adapt to it later. What we got wasn't sovereignty, it was self-imposed irrelevance. This isn't necessarily about refighting 2016 though. It's about assessing where we are in 2025 and asking, is Britain better off? A common thread is clear. Brexit has made our lives more difficult and needlessly so. This all proves the point that only by starting a process of reintegration can we at the very least start to fix things. Some may argue that rejoining would be difficult, but the question brought forth isn't about whether or not it will be easy for us to do so. If the benefits are overwhelmingly clear, complexity isn't a reason to deny our country a better future. As such, do we continue to let our pride blind our decision-making, blind us to the irreparable damage that has been made clear to us? I hope the answer to that is no. We won't anymore. Britain thrived for decades as a leading European nation, and we can again. Thank you.
Cool. So I want to put forward the case. I want to explain why Britain is particularly Eurosceptic. And I'll use this as a kind of small e Eurosceptic. Like, of course, there is a large part of the British public and political elites who just are hardcore Eurosceptics. But even in, let's say, that kind of New Labour camp back in the noughties, we have never really had broad buy-in to the idea of Europe as more than an economic union. In particular, we've never seen that it has the legitimacy through good performance or through common identity that states like Germany or Greece or Portugal have, and that allows them to justify the trade-offs in sovereignty and control that are part of this. And I think it's important that we accept that the EU is not just an economic union. It is a very serious level of political integration, right? And it would seem ridiculous to go to the Canadian Parliament and say, you should disband yourself and ask for membership to the Great Bloc to your south just because you will earn some more money. I imagine you will not be very popular in that assembly. And the roots of British Euroscepticism do go deep. So I think this was a point brought up earlier, but I want to expand on it. In particular, we have a political one. There is just a fundamental mismatch in our institutions. We have a winner-takes-all adversarial system of politics, right? We have an election, a government gets a majority, and then the next 5 years is, can they win and implement that? Do they lose? Does the opposition or their backbenchers prevent it? And then the public gets a choice. In Europe, instead, you have a consensus-based system based on a kind of give and take that works in some kind of wish-wash final result. And it's incredibly difficult from our perspective and from our institutions to see that as anything more than a series of defeats. Because in an organization of dozens of members, you are just going to have to give more, especially on the next point, which is that we are uniquely Eurosceptic due to our narratives. So this was touched on earlier, but Britain, not just being geographically an island, but the idea of British identity comes out of Britain being separate from, in particular, the great Catholic powers of France and Spain historically. That's what unites us, and it's what makes us distinct relative to other countries. And our European experience is totally distinct to everyone else. We joined in 73, and we're hit by massive inflation and some of the worst decades, and some of the worst economic performance since the war. And so, unsurprisingly, the narrative that we get out of it, especially since we also play an outrageous net contribution. I mean, we pay more than France does in net into the budget, even though we are considerably poorer in this time on a per capita level than France, means that the British people never come to associate this union with economic success. And this continues, and this means that they never give it the legitimacy needed. And this is why even in New Labour, even under Major, when there are attempts to reach out, even during the mid-80s with Thatcher, when there are attempts to reach out, Britain runs into this problem that we are not willing to consent to, for example, under Margaret Thatcher, the giving up of our monetary rights with the single currency, which gets talked about from 87, 88 as a spillover from the single market, in a way that countries that are not so Eurosceptic just don't have that problem. And this means that the British public's underlying Euroscepticism is justified and is intense, and it weakens us a lot. So we've heard a lot from the other side about this idea that we were like a leader, we were quite powerful in Europe, but it's quite hard to believe that. What's the great British leadership role in European history? I mean, it's the single market is the obvious one, and that's basically 2 years in which we do push.
Can I ask?
Yeah, of course.
Because this argument about if the public is Eurosceptic, do you factor in whether the public, if you had a debate whether we should abolish slavery and said, well, in my state, in the south of the US, everybody likes slavery, I mean, of the people we ask, would you then still defend the right that, okay, the North should abolish slavery, but they shouldn't tell the South what to do?
I mean, I think that's a different category of issue, right? That's an issue around individual rights, individual liberty. It's not an issue about political organization or economic policy. I don't think anyone's claiming that on either side here that the question about the EU is one of human servitude. At least definitely not the pro-rejoin side. So I think that's a false analogy in this case. And I think the European public should be or the British public should be considered. And what happens because of our skepticism, because of our unwillingness to join the deep political institutions, is that even when we tried to lead, the response of the other countries was, okay, we need to make a political response to what has happened. We need to have a single currency to make up for the fact that our market is now integrating. And we're not willing to join that. And so we fall behind, but we have to because we're in the EU, we're kind of being dragged along as if you were kind of strung to a motor car, right? Down the street as it goes on. Because while we're in the EU, we can't just block everything. Often they just overrule it. I'll rest my case.
Thank you very much. So now, before the second round begins, which is the most important because we're going to hear a lot of rebuttal, right now we want to see if your opinion has changed and to vote also the speakers here. So please scan again the QR code. So Ella skips bravo, thank you very much. Scan this QR code and vote because it's very important to see the results before and after. And also I want to say that our partner Deliberate is through that QR code and is providing us the opportunity for you, the audience, to also comment on this platform, address your questions and debate with each other while having the debate. Okay, so it is very important for all of us to see the impact of the debate. Okay, I see a lot of people scanning, and the speakers. Don't vote for yourselves. Okay, so now let's begin again with for the second round with the first speaker of the Brexit side for 5 minutes. Here.
I was probably misintroduced to begin with. They should have introduced me as a trade economist who was on the government's Trade and Agriculture Commission for 3 years. I'm no longer on that, so I can speak freely. But I'm always amused when I hear these memes that come out. And we've got them from each of our 3 speakers. The first one was it's harder and more expensive to trade with Europe. We also got from this first gentleman, our first speaker, that we have cut ourselves off from the EU. Whenever I hear this, I think, wow. Then the second speaker told me that Brexit has done economic damage. And the third speaker topped it off by telling me that food prices have gone up by 6% because of Europe, and that he has not got the ability to travel the way he could have if he had been old enough to travel when we're in the EU. I'm going to start with reverse order. The bad news is in the students before, when we were members of the EU, 10 times as many EU students came to study in the UK as UK students went to study in the EU. And we have hard statistics for this, which meant it was much more difficult for UK people to get places in universities because the EU had free range. They were as eligible as anyone else here. They also got to pay the same fees, and they also got to get student loans. And as of 2022, there were £5.3 billion of unpaid student loans that were owed by people in the EU who'd gone back to the EU. And the loan company, which is the exotic name of the company that gives out student loans, believes that less than 25% of those will ever be repaid. Meanwhile, when we actually left, 8.6 million EU citizens applied for settled status in the UK, and only 1.3 million UK citizens applied for settled status in the EU. So the idea that people were using their Brexit freedom or their EU freedoms to travel around Europe was just not true. Europeans were using their freedoms to come to the UK. And if you want evidence of that, I'd look around the room because you're all here. So that's, yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. Oh, I'm sure. As am I, but I'm an immigrant as well. But you're all welcome here. But you are here. So the idea that people wanted to go and live in Europe was difficult. And if you don't speak Greek, you probably aren't going to get a job in Greece unless you're doing tourist stuff. But the more interesting ones is this idea that we've cut ourselves off from Europe. I mean, we just haven't. All day long, my job is to look at trade figures, and I can tell you that our trade is exactly the same. Nor have we even made it more difficult to trade. What everyone seems to forget or they overlook is that the EU was not free. When we were members, all of your taxes, all of the VAT, not all of the VAT, but a proportion of the VAT you paid, and 80% of the tariffs we paid on imported goods was sent to Brussels. That allowed a handful of large businesses, and I'm talking super large businesses, large multinationals that can export all over the world and do, but when they exported to the EU, they didn't have to complete any paperwork. When they exported to America or Australia or Japan, they all managed to do that and pay their own costs. So we had this neat thing where taxpayers were giving money that went to subsidise large multinationals who were doing our trading. Because the UK is not a nation of tiny companies exporting to the EU. Our domestic economy very heavily relies on small and medium-sized companies. but our export economy is geared around Rolls-Royce aeroplane engines, BAE system, wings and landing gear and seats, the car industry, JLR, Aston Martin, Rolls-Royce, all of the big Japanese car manufacturers in Sunderland. Those guys don't need a subsidy to trade. They are able, and they do, all of the big drug companies, the chemical companies, they all manage to fill in those forms when they're selling to the US. They did not need that subsidy to the forms to sell to the EU, but they benefited from it. And the lobby groups that are presently saying we must rejoin the EU, we must pay to join the customs union, the SPS agreement, those people are the ones who are upset that they have to now pay their own costs.
Thank
and
you.
they would like you to all pay their costs for them again.
Thank you very much. I think in this round the opposition was a little bit sleepy. They didn't bother you with questions. So, okay, let's see now. The first speaker. Here.
Thank you. It's hard to ask questions when you're hearing stuff that just seems to disagree with what firms are actually telling us. The Bank of England does a survey called the Decision Maker Panel, and they speak to companies. They do this all the time, and they ask them, is it more expensive to trade? And they say, yes, it is. And they come up with all of these things. Well, they might have been able, some of these companies, they are filling in forms and doing that for other countries. Well, we should get rid of that. We should have free trade across the world. That would be good. Who knows? I have to say, actually, I had so much sympathy for what Reem was saying in her remarks. Unfortunately, it doesn't really touch the debate. The debate is that Brexit has been harmful. The fact that if you got rid of a whole heap of regulations and had more free trade, life would be much better. Well, yes, that's absolutely true. That's true if you're in the EU, it's true if you're out of the EU. But the point is, that's not the reality we live in. The reality we live in is that we've had a Brexit which has resulted in harm. And the harm has come, and a final thing I wanted to say before I get to that. So Jordan's making a very valid point as well. He said, we've got to defend democracy. Well, democracy is basically people voting for self-harm. Now, if people want to vote for self-harm, that's okay. That's democracy. But the debate was asking, is it harmful or not? Well, yes, it is. Smoking is harmful.
If your Commonwealth Garden person in the UK does not trade with the EU, why is it self-harm?
Well, this is the thing. You harm the country. The country as a whole has made a democratic decision, 58-42, and that has basically harmed everyone. And it's harmed everyone because it has made us poorer. The extra costs involved in trading mean that we now have to work harder or longer in order to buy the same amount of imports that we did previously. We are doing that.
Could I ask another question?
Yes, please.
So how much do you think it's added? How much do you think it was costing? How much do you think? Because we have no tariffs and no quotas. So where are these costs you're talking about?
Well, as I said, firms, when surveyed, always tell us there are costs here. And, there's a lot of non-tariff barriers. It's more stringent checks at borders. There's forms to fill in, which you mentioned. There's rules of origin that now have to be obeyed. There's extra labeling that has to be put on. We don't like it, but, it's resulting from Brexit. The terms of trade have fallen. We now have to work hard. We have to give up more to get the same as we did. Now, we can still get the same as we did from Europe. And that's, in fact, what's turned out to be happening. As you've said, trade has not fallen as we would expect. But the point is it's more expensive. And you can try and work out what that terms of trade is worth We worked it out. We think it takes about 2.5% off real personal disposable income. Now, have you seen that in the reality? Is there evidence that real personal disposable income has fallen? Yes. We've had this thing called the cost of living crisis. Prices have gone up a lot. Wages have not gone up by as much. We have become poorer. I note that I don't hear about cost of living crises in Germany or France or anywhere else. It's very much a UK thing.
Sorry, may I ask a question on that? I mean, the Germans are concerned that they're undergoing like serious deindustrialization at the moment. Everyone in Europe is hurting. That's why all their governments are unpopular right now.
Wait a minute. So your question is?
My question is, how can you claim that like it's just Britain that has undergone this cost of living crisis, which you're using to argue that it's us leaving the EU that has made us poorer?
Okay. If you compare real personal disposable income growth across European countries, you'll see that ours has actually fallen relative to everywhere else in Europe.
No. I'm going to protect him. Too much questions. Okay. We appreciate your enthusiasm, but I have to protect him.
And the trouble is that that's permanent. You've lost that level. It's not going to come back. Maybe growth will come back eventually, hopefully, someday, but you're never going to get that level of income back. Somebody, I think it was Jordan, mentioned the massive rise in uncertainty and the effect that had on investment in the UK. It had an effect on businesses in the UK investing. In fact, investment fell by something like 23% on account of Brexit, so the survey tells us. That's not good. That's capital that's not there. That affects our ability to produce output forever. It's not going to come back. What was the final thing? This actually is something that could change. And that is that extra trade helps productivity growth. Why does it do that? Because it creates competition, something I know Reem is a big fan of. And that competition encourages firms to improve, to develop, for productivity improvements. A lot of productivity improvements also come just through trading itself, by getting into export markets and having to compete abroad. You learn, you improve, you become more productive. That has clearly stopped. Again, just the data here. In the 2010s, we were growing, or labour productivity was growing at a remarkably low 0.4% a year. That's just really bad. Since 2022, labour productivity has not grown at all. Not at all. Now, I don't know, maybe it's just a coincidence that was after Brexit. I suspect it wasn't. Put that all together, we are worse off. We reckon the hit to GDP is of the order of 3 to 5%. We've seen it already. I'm sorry, Brexit has harmed the UK.
Thank you very much. Here.
Thank you. The cost of living crisis has nothing to do with Brexit. It has everything to do with bad government policy. You mentioned the labour market specifically, which I think is a really, really important part of why everything is going so wrong in Britain. Just to put things into context, Britain is extraordinarily poor. If we joined the United States of America and became the 51st state, we would be the poorest state. We are literally poorer than Mississippi in terms of GDP per capita. Britain is poor. And it's because we have an extraordinarily... Yes?
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so you are using GDP per capita as a measure in order to determine, if we did join the USA on GDP per capita, we'd be poorer. But that doesn't necessarily mean living standards as a whole, because living standards, there's different metrics that you can use to determine that. And ultimately, if we did actually join the US in some kind of scenario, it'd be more likely that actually our living standards would actually be comparable to New England, for example. So I'd like to posit the question: is it best for us to just compare it to the US and GDP per capita, or would it be better to compare it with different measures?
Thank you.
That's a very, very good point. Of course, economists know that there are various different metrics you could use to measure wealth. However, it is undoubtedly true that there are far more economic opportunities in the United States than in the UK. And specifically on the labour market, 1 in 4 working age adults in the United Kingdom are currently out of work. 1 in 4. That is absolutely astronomical. And we are currently spending literally billions of pounds on welfare. So part of the problem is we have increased the size of the state. We have increased taxation. This parliament, as a result of the last budget, we are now going to see taxation as a proportion of GDP go up to 38%. This is insane. We are not poor because of Brexit. We're poor because we've made ourselves poor. It has nothing to do with the European Union. It has nothing to do with us leaving the European Union. And it has everything to do with those people, those absolute bumbling idiots in Westminster, making terrible decisions that make all of us poorer. The size of the state has expanded significantly. And after we've left the European Union, we haven't made any decisions in order to actually repeal any of that. Now, Catherine knows a lot more about this than I do. The free trade agreements that we have had since we have left the European Union, the CPTPP, it's a terrible name, isn't it? The free trade agreement, or I suppose somewhat of a free trade agreement with the United States. A lot of these, it's not as comprehensive as it could have been, but there are so many aspects to this that we can have, and we can use those opportunities since we've left the European Union. Britain as a whole is now poor, not because of Brexit itself, but because of the decisions that we have made. And I do think that when it comes to a lot of the statistics that you discussed in terms of the comparisons between 2010, is talking about it as though it's some sort of correlation, sort of correlation versus causation argument. And I really do think that we've got to look at the root cause of these problems. As the size of the state has expanded, we have seen the United Kingdom become a poorer country. And part of this problem is taxation has gone up, regulations have gone up. We have seen more and more people go on to long-term sickness benefits. I think that the best type of welfare is a job, and the fact that we have a quarter of the working age population on benefit out of work is absolutely insane. Yes, go on.
Yes, bumbling idiot from Westminster here. I was. Would you agree that the government has botched Brexit and has done a terrible job of implementing Brexit since being given this opportunity, as you presented?
That's a very good question. I wouldn't say they've botched it. I would say they did a bad job at taking the opportunities and actually succeeding with using them. I mean, I mentioned in my previous remarks that sort of top 10 things I would abolish. Shock that you heard that from a libertarian. But the top 10 things that I would get rid of after leaving the European Union. And we haven't done any of those things. There are so many aspects to this. I think Moroccan tomatoes example is fantastic because there literally isn't even a protectionist case for imposing tariffs and quotas on Moroccan tomatoes, and it's low-hanging fruit. Hey, I'm so funny. Yes, well, I think what's interesting about all of this is fundamentally that our membership of the European Union has prevented us. It's effectively acted as a shackle to our membership within the European Union, because it means that we have to be beholden to these random people. I don't know who they are. I think Nigel Farage said this when he was in the European Parliament. Who are you? Who are you people? I don't know who you are. I didn't vote for you. I don't know your name. And our taxpayer money is being spent in the European Union. I don't know how much time I've got left because I think it paused.
No, don't worry. It's just the TV. Continue.
Okay, cool. Amazing. Yes. So if we want Britain to be richer, because fundamentally that's what we want a freer and more prosperous Britain. That's what we want. We want people to be better off. We want more people in work. The government just has to be smaller. We need to ensure that taxation is lower, but you get lower taxation by cutting public spending. And I really do think that this government now has the opportunity to do all of those things now that we've left the European Union. Hasn't done it yet. You cannot hope and pray for growth. I really think that this government sort of want growth in the same way that I want to learn Greek. I might download the Duolingo app. I might have a look at it and sort of tap in once or twice a day, but I'm really not committed, and there's actually a bunch of other things I'd rather do with my time. Same case for growth. The government have increased taxation.
Sorry, can I
Yes, of
ask,
course.
Rather than saying that you're a bad person for not learning Greek, in the same way that you said that bad politicians who are not doing the right thing, could it be that the actual physical or kind of practical constraints, you're not learning Greek because there's only 24 hours in a day, and you prioritize other things, which are, I imagine, very important. That's why you prioritize them. So you cannot criticize yourself for not learning Greek, and you cannot criticize the government for not dropping the tariff to Morocco because they don't want to do it unilaterally. They have to renegotiate a deal with Morocco, and they don't have the resources to do it. They prioritize on doing other deals. So it's a constraint. It's not that they're bad.
No, I think they're terrible. I think they're very bad. And part of it is because there isn't the willpower to do it. They have said that growth is their number one priority. And they have done everything in antithesis to actually achieving growth. They have increased taxation to literally the largest amount of tax take in British history. We had lower taxes under the Labour governments of Gordon Brown and Tony Blair than we did under the last 14 years of Conservative government. That is insane. The fact that they call themselves Conservatives is an absolute joke. And part of the problem is we are currently seeing the size of...
Sorry.
Yes.
Can I just ask what is a really obvious question, I guess, which is Brexit and the EU has what to do with the size of government and the failures of the current Labour government, as you see them?
Now that we've left the EU, we can abolish lots of things that we couldn't do when we were in the EU. A lot of it is because a lot of these things are EU directives. Now, I think it was brought up earlier, but the Northern Ireland Protocol does make a lot of that quite difficult. One example is the Tobacco Directive. It means that it's very difficult to implement our own legislation. As a result, I think the Northern Ireland Protocol was implemented pretty horrendously. And it does mean that, for example, lots of pieces of legislation that we pass in Parliament is not compatible with EU directives. And so we are sort of still beholden to the European Union in some respects. So the connection here is fundamentally that now that we have left the EU, now that we have Brexit, we can seize all of these opportunities that we didn't have before. I really think that, I suppose this answers your previous question. What is it we're talking about when we're talking about Brexit? Is it the current Brexit that we have, or is it some kind of opportunity? And we have years and years and years of time to actually look at this and have governments hopefully elect politicians that actually want growth. We have to fight for a freer and more prosperous Britain, and we can only do that when we are free from the shackles of the European Union.
You have one more question. From dear Mike.
Hello.
I have a question, but first, Yassas. I'm really confused by one thing, because there's been a few really good points going back and forth, but I'm really struggling with this. It seems like a dodging of the question, which is fundamentally, if we're saying that Brexit has been harmful, and you're saying it's not been harmful, but you're saying that we've done this thing that we can definitively say has happened. Now, there are these bad things because we've not decided to make the changes that I would like to see. That means you're agreeing that there are harms that have happened, and then therefore it's been worse for. So you can't say that, oh, wouldn't it have been great if the world had done the thing we wanted it to do when they didn't, therefore leading to the harms that they are saying. I have issues with some of the things you guys are saying too. But that will come later. But I'm just really struggling with this. Yeah. Sorry, no, that is my question. Like, how can you say that? How can you say, like, fundamentally, oh, it would have been fine if we had just did these things because we didn't do those things. Therefore, all the harms they're saying exist. Therefore, they're right.
Great question. Things basically haven't changed since we left the European Union because we haven't repealed all of that legislation, right? So Brexit hasn't been harmful. It has effectively done nothing because we've not taken up those opportunities. We know that our trade with the European Union is basically the same as it was before the European Union. We know that when we look at, for example, imports and exports, previously, before Brexit and afterwards, things haven't really changed. I want to see change, and we now have the opportunity to do it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now let's continue with Mr. Koutsoumbos.
I feel there's a bit of a disconnect between the two sides. I'm not just talking about a fundamental disagreement, but I feel like we're having two different debates here at the moment, because the other side seem to be trying to argue for why Brexit was a good idea at the time that people voted for it, And sure, that's a debate you can have, and there are legitimate arguments for and against. What we are talking about is the debate you all came to hear, which is 9 years later, now we've had that time to actually review and take stock of what's happened since we made that critical decision. How are things looking? Are we happy with that decision? Do we feel it's gone well? Do we feel it's gone badly? So I don't know why we keep hearing arguments about that go back to 2016. People didn't know what was going to happen 9 years into the future when they voted for it. They were voting based on their hopes and aspirations for what might happen, and that is fair enough. That's how democracy works. People can change their mind. That's also how democracy works. And similarly, there's a reason why I asked my honourable opponent a moment ago was, has Brexit been botched? Because if it has, and that seems to be decidedly the view of the other side, or at least the second speaker for the other side, then that is still Brexit having been harmful, Brexit having gone very wrong. Whether it was a bad idea or whether it's just been badly implemented, it's still a bad Brexit, either way. So I feel the other side really need to tell us why they feel it was actually worth it, why they feel not just it was a good idea at the time, but why they feel it's still a good idea now, and why they feel it has gone well, rather than lamenting the Brexit they wished they had, but didn't, which is not what we're here to talk about.
A question on that.
Go ahead.
So even if Brexit so far hasn't been all it could be, isn't the newfound ability to maybe carry out all the better changes that we want on this side worth it? And that in the fact we can now do this, that we're outside the EU, doesn't the potential gain outweigh the transitional costs?
I'm so glad you asked that, because that allows me to talk about New Zealand again and pick up from where I left off in my first speech. If you were wondering what I was leading up the garden path with that, because I gave this hypothetical. What if New Zealand did have the choice to decide, and they could see into the future, and they could see the horrendous economic shock they were going to suffer in the first 10 years, but then the massive recovery and all that freedom they were going to use to become a very resilient economy they are today in the years after that? Would they have done it? And if they'd asked me as their civil servant, my advice to them would have been, it's worth it, it's worth all the pain, it's worth all the cost if you don't intend to go back, if you don't intend to return to the way things were. And I would say to them, don't do what Britain did in the 1960s, which is after having snubbed what was then the European Economic Community in the 1950s, when they could have joined for free, could have been a founding member, turned their noses up at it, and then realised what a horrible mistake they'd made, and applied to join in 1961. The cost of that accession, the common agricultural policy and the common fisheries policy, the two things we had to swallow, neither of which we wanted, both of which became the bane of our membership of the European Union. So the question is now...
A question?
Yeah.
I mean, the question about today in comparison is what possible policy is the current EU going to pass in between us leaving and us hypothetically rejoining, given that it looks like, it's very possible that France or Germany is ruled by like a hard right party in the next 5 years, and none of these governments are going to want to test some major reform that we would dislike at the risk of electing that group.
Yes, another fantastic point. And I would remind you that you don't have to be in favour of rejoining the EU to argue that leaving the EU was a bad decision and that it's had a negative impact. There are still options available to you. The question you really want to ask yourself when you're deciding, is it worth it, is, again, I repeat my advice, yes, it's worth it. It's worth all the pain that you might have to go through to get to the land of milk and honey that was still being promised 9 years later, but it hasn't materialised. I wonder where all that money for the NHS is. But nonetheless, right, even if we do get there, and that's not our fault in that case, that's still a bad Brexit, and that's still on you. It's still your...
Order.
So on that point, if it's worth it, it's only worth it if we don't intend to go back. So is that what Britain is saying right now? Is that their position? If we look, what the British public is saying, that wonderful British public again, 61% of them say Brexit has already been a failure. They've already made up their mind. 51% to 32% would vote to rejoin the EU today, in spite of all the problems that I agree that would pose if they did. 69% say the economy is worse off because of Brexit, including 38% of people who voted leave in 2016. What about get Brexit done in 2019? That was only 6 years ago. Since then, nothing has changed. The other side made that case for us. Very little has changed. A lot of domestic regulations are basically the same. Our policies on our foreign policy, on defence, our approach to Ukraine, our approach to Trump in the US are all virtually the same. There's very close alignment with the EU. We have a Labour government now that is terrified of offending and scaring away red wall voters in the north who voted to leave the EU, which is what Jordan pointed out before, and hence why they're being very hesitant. Instead, we're seeing rejoining of the EU by stealth. And just this morning, we had a Deputy Prime Minister talking openly about the benefits of rejoining the customs union for anyone who was following the news today. So none of this paints a picture of a country that is decidedly not. No, I won't take that point because I'm running out of time now. Okay. Nobody's painting a picture in the UK now, neither the public nor its government, and nor even the other side, frankly, are saying that actually we think it is worth it. We think that there is no case for returning. All indicators point towards we're creeping back towards the EU because we are realising what a spectacular decision this was.
Thank you very much. Okay. We will continue again with Debate London, so here.
So the core of the speech we've just heard is the question, if we're going to rejoin the EU anyway, or if we're going to go closer to the EU, what was the point of Brexiting? And that's what I'm going to respond to. So, and I think this is, it's important to go back to my discussion about ingrained Euroscepticism in this country, which just hasn't been challenged at this point in the debate. And it's, having left, we actually have this great opportunity that we have a lot more optionality with our relationship with the EU. In a sense, we have 5 possible relationships. We could have literally nothing special, we could have a free trade deal, we could have a customs union, we could have a single market, or we could rejoin, right? Given that this country is already quite Eurosceptic, that feels like a better set of options than when we were in the EU, which was stay in or get out. And that's what like other Eurosceptic countries like Switzerland and Norway also do. But let's say for a moment, and to be on their side, you probably do have to believe that we want to rejoin the EU at some point in the future. Why would we not want to rejoin the EU if you believe it's been bad? The advantage for it is we have seen what happens when we leave the EU. We have seen what Britain's sans EU is, right? We've got a kind of great A-B case here in our history, which allows us to overcome our Euroscepticism. While we were in Europe, our capacity to contribute, to shape the union, to push things we'd want, right? We'd probably really want to push the Draghi report, to integrate capital markets, to better allow our tech firms to get going, all this stuff that the EU is quite bad at the moment, right? But because we were this weird outlier that was never comfortable with being in the EU, we never were really able to do any of that because it raised questions we weren't willing to answer around like loss of sovereignty and, around loss of sovereignty. But if we rejoin, having Brexited, we acknowledge that our place is in Europe. We are no longer so Eurosceptic. We are willing to give up that sovereignty, and we are willing to join Europe as a member that's willing to really push our interests, but also make concessions that will allow us to do so. Go ahead.
Your own side has pointed out the multiple range of different possible relationships the UK could have with the EU, and deciding to take one of those, especially that means sacrificing a little bit of sovereignty, like rejoining the single market, for example, but not the entire EU, is surely contingent on accepting that bad things have happened since leaving EU. So don't you accept that this isn't a binary between staying out and rejoining? This is a case of making the right decision about what to do next based on being honest with everyone here about what has happened in the 9 years since we voted to leave.
Yes, and I'm making an especially extreme version of that point, but it still holds for the single market. If the British public, having now actually seen what it's like to be out of the EU, having seen our attempts to utilize it, now conclude, actually, we want to be in the single market. Well, whatever our future relationship is, it's going to be more stable. We're going to be more productive in that role because we can overcome our kind of fears and concerns, and we know we've got a comprehensive view of what's possible, and we know the right place to place ourselves in relation to Europe. And in particular, if you see that Europe's going to be around for a long time, probably, then to have spent the short term, in the scheme of things, how long is a decade or two, economic pain, to come to this realization is worth it.
Thank you very much. So, dear Alex.
So ultimately, sort of the question of the debate here is, of course, has Brexit caused more harm than it has for good? And I think in some cases, at certain points in this debate, we've kind of strayed away from it. And in terms of sort of the opposition, it's sort of been the case of what could be versus what the reality is right now. And what could be, yes, it could be better, it could be great in the future. But ultimately, when you're talking sort of like in a temporal sense for the question, has it caused more harm than it has good? Right now, in terms of what we have in terms of statistics and sort of data, it's caused more harm. If we want to sort of go down that route of what could be, let's also look at some alternatives that we've tried to exploit as a result of Brexit. I mean, we can sort of take to examples sort of with sort of the UK-Japan deal that we made recently, added less than 0.07% to our GDP. Or the CPTPP, less than 0.01% to our GDP. How are these sort of any better to the massive losses that we've experienced because of Brexit?
Could I just ask you, how much do you think any trade deal adds to GDP? Do you know?
Ultimately, I mean, I don't know. There's the examples that I have. I don't know sort of every example of sort of like what kind of trade deal adds to sort of this and that. But like ultimately sort of a main sort of argument that was put forward as sort of like a benefit of Brexit was we could make our own trade deals, we could do it in ways that sort of the EU couldn't hinder, and well, we've made these trade deals. They haven't really contributed much to our economy because ultimately those trade deals are going to relate to the economy. And also in terms of the point to the sort of we've made ourselves poorer, I agree. Brexit has resulted in making ourselves poorer because we voted in making ourselves poorer. Okay.
Do you think there's any other possible cause of the UK's deindustrialisation other than Brexit?
Well, I mean, you could sort of talk about I mean, deindustrialization has happened over a very long time. It's started all the way back in since Thatcher, for example, and ultimately, no, but Brexit has made it worse for us in particular. I mean, you could sort of make the case of maybe sort of certain how we've dealt with free trade and sort of like putting sort of industries overseas and so on and so forth, but. I sort of, in terms of making ourselves poorer, Brexit has made ourselves poorer, and also austerity as a result of the Conservative government has made ourselves poorer. Brexit has just simply added on top of that austerity in the first place.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, sure.
What evidence do you have that austerity ever happened? When public spending reduced by about 0.09%, did austerity happen, and why do you think it made us poorer?
Yes, austerity did happen because even though it might have sort of only changed by that small amount, it's by that small amount we didn't keep up with what we could have been. So, for example, I mean, with the prison systems that we have right now, it has been severely underfunded, and as a result, we've had a prison capacity crisis as a result of the sort of lingering effects of austerity not being able to fund these services properly. And sort of, so, and sort of a final point that I want to make. So linking it back to the question of the fact that the debate is how has Brexit caused more harm than good? It's causing more harm in the fact that it is sort of creating the opportunity for sectarian division to grow in Northern Ireland.
Question. If you describe a surgery to remove an appendix only in terms of the cutting open of the body and taking a piece out, you're just describing its harms and it sounds bad. But the only way it becomes a good thing is when you compare it to the harms of not removing the appendix and it bursting. So my question is, what are the harms of not having done Brexit when people voted for it?
I mean, ultimately, we won't know. I mean, ultimately, you're talking about sort of the like an alternate timeline. I mean, ultimately, we're never going to sort of truly know. But what we do know right now is that with the harm specifically in our current timeline, it's evident and it's clear and it's there. But in terms of sort of Northern Ireland in particular, sort of the FEPS sort of polled people and sort of understanding how people identify themselves, whether sort of strongly sectarian in terms of being a unionist or a nationalist. For unionists, it increased from 17% in 2016 to 27% now. And from nationalists, it increased from 18% to 26%. Now, that may not seem like much initially, but that is still an increase and it's a trend that is increasing. And that 26% or that 27% is still an important thing. And so ultimately, as I said, the fact that we have sort of left Brexit is sort of created friction. The fact that we have had to effectively create a sort of special deal for the fact with Northern Ireland in having to sort of put up a trade barrier, because if we hadn't otherwise and we'd put it along the Northern Ireland-Irish border, you can be sure that a hell of a lot of violence would have happened between the nationalists and unionists. So ultimately, with all those points, I rest my case.
Thank you very much. And also, I have to say, Alex, that you're very brave, okay? In a difficult panel, you stood very well. Congrats.
So this is my favorite bit of the night. I debated way too much at university. I did it instead of having a life. And my main thing I loved about it was the rebuttal phase, and that's what we get into now. So this is all in good fun, but it's my favorite thing. So the previous cases that we heard from Tony, Tony's case was mostly built around Brexit was bad because we're going to go back into the EU and that will be worse. Well, firstly, obviously, we had a response to that from Lucas already about why learning from it is more important. But secondly, I just don't think that we are about to go back into the EU, right? Whenever we do the polling, it's still a minority of the population that wants to rejoin the EU. We currently have both a government and a main opposition party in the UK who don't want to rejoin the EU. Rejoining the EU is not the position of any of the parties who are likely to be in government anytime soon. It's probably not about to happen, so it's probably not a big thing you should think about when you're deciding if Brexit was good or not. Stephen's speech. Stephen talked a little bit about, did voters vote for self-harm? But if they voted for self-harm, that's still harm. So they win the side of the debate. Fair enough. It's only self-harm if the only thing you think about is economics. According to the same theory, leisure time does more harm than good because it's not economically productive. When you are watching Netflix, you are not having your second gig that contributes to the economy more, and that is worse.
That's not what economics says. So just to say, like, do you think that the economists who say that you optimize the combination between leisure and work are wrong? They do not say that leisure is bad. But they do say, in the vast majority, that Brexit was bad. So that is a settled issue, as much as that leisure and work both give utility to people, as I think everybody in this audience will agree.
So your question is?
Do you think the economists are systematically wrong, thinking that leisure and work give utility?
Because this is where economists try to stray into philosophy and they show they don't know what they're doing. Because suddenly this is justified with utility. Utility is not an economic concept because utility is subjective. It can't be quantified in a spreadsheet and it depends what matters to you. So if voters think that actually Brexit is worth it, that having that sovereignty and having that control is more important than any of the economic consequences they talked about, that means it was worth it. Which is why when all the economists get together with their spreadsheets and quantify it and say it's bad, they miss the question. And I think that's the problem.
Yes. I'm not sure we missed the question, but let me ask you this one. Economists think consumption is good and they think leisure is good. Brexit undoubtedly has reduced our consumption and has reduced our leisure as well. Ergo, it's bad, isn't it?
But again, economists have no way to say, what does sovereignty mean to you? What does choice over your country's political destiny? What does the ability to set your own laws mean to you? It's in the same way that if we were to ask only engineers, was Brexit good or bad? We would get a limited answer. And again, it misses the question. But we've had, sorry, I'm being pointed over there.
Okay, take my mic.
Yeah, aside of economists and engineers, a pharmacist, right? So it's all about taking control, right? At the same time, like 10 years ago, the UK had control of EMA, European Medicine Agency. The HQ was here in London. You were co-leading, I'd say, the agency, being a global hub, regulatory pharmaceutical hub for that. And literally, you gave the best gift to the Netherlands, to Amsterdam. Take the HQ, control global pharmaceutical regulations with FDA, right? So, did you lose control? Was it harmful or not for that, from a pharmacist?
So this is where we get into the comparative, and indeed where we have to engage in the counterfactual, because this debate is a counterfactual. We have to consider what would the world have been if we hadn't do this, because otherwise anything that's difficult never makes sense, because you're like, well, that's hard, so I'm not going to do it. You have to consider what the consequences of not doing the hard thing are, and does that outweigh the consequences for the pharmaceutical industry or not? And that's what I want to talk to you about when it comes back to democracy. What if in 2016, the British government of the day had said, you know what? That vote thing, we're just not going to do that. The Brexit thing, that's just not going to happen. Leaving aside the principle of that, usually when you deny democracy to the people, bad things happen and bad results happen. It rarely ends well, and you end up with less utility for everybody. Because voters, when you ignore them, they get angry. Right? They're a lot like cats. The more you ignore them, the angrier they get, the more they act out to show to you that they are angry, and they make you suffer for it. And the people are right to do this because they believe that they've been denied their say, denied what is their right, because they were told they were going to make this choice, and then you've made it for them. But I believe Whitehall disagrees with me.
Don't speak for His Majesty's government, or Whitehall. My question is this: your sole argument seems to be that Brexit was a good idea in 2016 because 52% of people said so when they voted. And you know what? Fair enough. That is the way democracy works. But then why do you consistently ignore what voters are telling you now, 9 years later, when 61% of them are consistently saying now they think Brexit was a mistake, they think it's been harmful. 51% of them to 32% would vote to rejoin today, even though we've outlined why actually that might be a risky decision to take without thinking about it. Why is voter opinion important to you 9 years ago, but not today?
Since 2016, voters have repeatedly rejected parties who wanted to rejoin the EU and ignore the Brexit vote. Thank you for playing, Tony. So that is simply not what they want. Voters get angry when you ignore them, right? And they therefore turn to parties who want to channel that anger, who want to give them someone to blame, who say the elites are stealing your votes and we are going to take it back from them. And voters, when they are angry, often vote without diligence. They don't make informed choices, and they vote for whoever seems to share that anger of emotion most. And unfortunately, this often means they vote for populists. They vote for unscrupulous people who are going to take advantage of them. These are people who govern... we still in time?
You talk practically about the economy, and a question, after Brexit, we see less companies and money flow in London. Any high yield bond is never issued in the UK. And obviously the economy is related to productivity, and you see less talent from students coming from Europe to study in the UK because of a number of constraints. Don't you think that this might have an increased impact on Brexit? And on top, for the economy, you see the second largest UK company want to delist in the US and leave the UK. And you don't see any European company want to list in the UK anymore. do you think there is any impact from
Thank you.
from Brexit?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Harms to particular companies, harms to the pharmaceutical industry is not the full picture and is not the comparative. Because again, the comparative is the counterfactual. It's a UK that is now being governed by unscrupulous populist parties. It is a UK that is being governed by people who allow corruption to flourish and who the people didn't really have a good say and didn't make an informed choice when they voted them in. That creates worse governance for everybody. That creates more uncertainty that spooks the market even more, that makes even fewer companies want to list in the UK, that makes the UK even poorer, that makes the UK even worse governed because instead of getting voters to vote on policy, you have made them angry and had them vote on emotion. And that leads to less utility for everybody. And that is the counterfactual here. If you had been to turn around and tell voters you cannot have the Brexit that you vote for. And that is why, even though the pain of the appendix surgery, even though the transitional costs of Brexit, the harms seem painful, it would have been worse to allow the appendix to stay, to be inflamed, and to have exploded within the body. It would have been worse for everyone. It would have been worse for democracy itself in the UK. And therefore, on the balance of harms, Brexit was the comparatively better choice. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. So now, with all the delays, I have to tell you that because we have to respect this beautiful house, okay? They told us that at 10 we have to finish the debate. It's very interesting that we're here 2 hours and no one has left the building. Everyone loves this debate, and I think it's a huge congratulations to both houses of the debate, from the proposition and the opposition. So, and now, before we wrap it up, what we would like to do, as always, we're doing that in every event, we want to award some individuals who support us through this journey of, making Debate House accessible to all of you. The first person that we want to award is Dr. Monastiriotis for his contribution, okay? And for the photo. So the second person is, as I mentioned before, also a friend of our organization, and friend of mine and Christos, the president of LSC, Hellenic Association, Theodoris Kalabokis. Thank you very much for everything. The only reason why there is a difference in the sizes is not that someone is more important than the other, it's because of the airport, because we're coming from Greece and they had a problem with that, and, technicalities due to Brexit, I don't know. So, the next person is Mike from Debate London. Thank you very much for this beautiful collaboration. And wonderful speakers as well. Thank you very much. The last award is in one of my friends. He doesn't know that I'm gonna do that. 2 years ago, I was studying at King College and I was working in the British Parliament, House of Commons, for Sir Peter Bottomley. And it was a very interesting year of mine, but it was very challenging and very difficult. And it was in that year that we started developing Debate House, as you experienced it like that. And I was in my dorm and my friend was helping me with, camera that was, an outdated camera and all that, with scripts, very unprofessional stuff. But he helped me without even knowing how we're going to develop this. And this kind of friendship and this kind of people, it is what makes, life unique and wonderful. So, Luke, come here, my friend. Thank you. And also, I have to say that he was studying mathematics at King's and then he betrayed us, and now he's at LSE. But it's okay. It's okay. Thank you. So, before we end the debate, I want to say a huge thank you. This is our first international debate as Debate House. And thank you, all of you, for your support. All of the speakers, the audience, you were fantastic. But before we leave, we have also some drinks for networking, to get to know each other better. And also, before we leave, I want you to, once again, for the last time, to scan the QR code to join to the deliberate and tell us your opinion, your final opinion, whether you believe that the proposition won or the opposition. So after that, drinks are waiting for us, and let's get to know each other.
Yeah, as long as you're scanning, we want to thank one more time Stelios Foundation, because it doesn't support only here, it supported us back in Greece when we had one great debate with 400 people there. And how many of you did you know Stelios Foundation before tonight? Yeah, that's what we want, and that's why we think most of the people who support us and they're anonymous are the most important people. And thanks again for Stelios Foundation, even though Sir Stelios is not here.
Thank you very much.